Hi guys, it's Friday, so that means it's story time today, and we are going to be reading two stories about presidents. We're going to read about our first president, George Washington, who fought in the American Revolution. And then the second one is about Abraham Lincoln, who was president during the Civil War. Both of these stories are super fun. George Washington talks about his love for dogs and animals. And Abraham Lincoln, we get to hear a story about what he does with his big hat. George Washington and the General's Dog. George Washington is one of America's greatest heroes. Most people know that George was honest and brave, but there's something about George that people don't always know. George Washington loved animals. George learned to ride horses as a boy. Sometimes he rode them into town. George rode fast, but he never fell. People said he was the best rider they'd ever seen. When George grew up, he moved to a farm called Mount Vernon. Every day, George checked on the horses and hogs. He checked on the oxen, mules, and sheep. But he spent the most time with his dogs. George had a lot of dogs. He owned 36 dogs in his lifetime. He took them hunting. He played with them. He even gave them cute names like Mopsy, Sweet Lips, and True Love. Sometimes George spoiled his dogs. He let them run around in the house. One day, Martha, George's wife, cooked a ham for dinner. George's dog, Vulcan, jumped on the table and stole the ham right off the table. Martha chased after him, but George just laughed. George liked being in Mount Vernon with Martha and the animals, but America needed him. America was not yet its own country. It was an English colony. That means it belonged to England. Many American colonists wanted to be free from England, so they went to war. The war was called the American Revolution. The colonists chose George to be their general. George chose his favorite dog, Sweet Lips, to go with him. He said goodbye to Martha and Mount Vernon. He jumped on his horse, Nelson. Then he rode into battle. Sweet Lips was right there beside him. In George's day, soldiers often brought dogs with them to war. Dogs helped hunt. They helped track the way. Dogs helped guard against wild animals. Best of all, dogs were great partners. The general of the English army was named William Howe. He had a dog too. He also had 9,000 soldiers. They had plenty of supplies. George did not have nearly as many supplies. Sometimes his soldiers were cold. Sometimes they were hungry, but they did not give up. In the fall of 1777, George's troops went to Pennsylvania. They were fighting the English troops. Guns fired, rat-a-tat-tat. Cannons roared. Boom, bang, smoke filled the air. Finally, the fighting ended. The English soldiers went back to their camp. The battle was over for the day. The smoke began to clear. George noticed a dog without a soldier. It looked lost. George bent down and patted the dog's head. The dog followed George back to the colonist camp. He wagged his tail. "Whose dog is this?" wondered George. George looked at the dog's collar. The name? The tag had a man's name on it. That name was William Howe. William Howe? George couldn't believe his eyes. William Howe was the enemy. Word about the enemy dog spread through the camp. Some of George's men wanted to keep the dog, but George said no. George believed the dog belonged with his master. George had his friend Alexander Hamilton write a note to General Howe. The note said that George wanted to return the dog. Both sides raised white flags. The white flags meant no one could fight. George's soldiers walked the dog across the battlefield. They gave him back to General Howe. People in England found out about George's good deed. The English still wanted to beat George and win the war, but now they respected him. Some English people even liked him. They had never heard a story of such great kindness between enemies. In 1783, America won the war against England. America became its very own country. George Washington went home to Mount Vernon. Friends around the world wanted to honor George. They wondered what he would like. Then they remembered the story about the dog. Soon, presents started to arrive in Mount Vernon. The King of Spain sent George a mule. George named him Royal Gift. A friend from France gave George an even bigger gift, 7 dogs. George's work was not done, though. The American people needed a leader. They elected George to be their first president. People all over America loved their new president. They cheered when he rode by in his carriage. They knew it was him because his 6 white horses always led the way. The stories in this book are true. We're not exactly sure how it all happened, but we tried our best to show the way they might have been. This is the note to William Howe. General Washington's compliments to General Howe. Does himself the pleasure to return to him a dog which accidentally fell into his hands, and by the inscription on the collar appears to belong to General Howe. October 6, 1777. Here's the actual letter. Pretty cool, huh? All right, now we're going to read about our 16th president, Mr. Abraham Lincoln, and his hat. Abe Lincoln didn't have much money, but when he became a lawyer, he wanted to look his best. He bought a long black coat and a tall black hat. Each day, Abe wore his hat to his new job. People noticed the tall man in the tall hat. He was friendly to everyone. When they needed a lawyer, they remembered him. Abe lived in Illinois. His state was mostly wilderness. Then more and more settlers came. They built houses and farms and new towns. Sometimes they didn't get along. They argued over land and animals and money. Lawyers like Abe could help people settle their arguments. They could help people get a fair trial in court. Abe Lincoln was a smart lawyer. People came to him with all kinds of problems. He helped them all, but he had one problem himself. He forgot to answer letters. He forgot where he put important papers. A good lawyer cannot forget. Abe wanted to be a good lawyer, but he was not a good paper keeper. What could he do? Abe had an idea. His tall hat. He could push letters deep inside it. He could stuff notes into the leather band. When he took off his hat, the papers would remind him what he had to do. The idea worked most of the time. One day, some boys played a trick on Abe. They tied a string across the street. They strung it way up high. Everyone in town could walk under it. Everyone except Abe. When Abe walked down the street, the string knocked off his hat. Papers flew everywhere. He bent over to pick them up. The boys ran out of hiding. They jumped all over him. Abe laughed. He was not mad at the boys. He liked a good joke, but the trick did not stop him from carrying papers in his hat. Once, a lawyer sent Abe a letter. Abe stuck it in his hat. The next day, Abe bought a new hat. He put away his old one. Weeks later, the lawyer wrote again. "Why didn't you answer my letter?" Then Abe remembered. The letter was still in his old hat. Many towns in Illinois had no lawyers or judge, so every spring and fall a judge and some lawyers traveled from town to town. Abe went too. He packed his hat with papers, his checkbook, and a handkerchief. At the head of the parade of lawyers rode the judge. No one could miss him. He weighed over 300 pounds. Two horses pulled his buggy. Abe's horse was skinny and slow. His name was Old Buck. Abe and Old Buck traveled lonely country roads, in the snow, in the rain, in the mud. Traveling made Abe very tired. He dreamed of a soft bed and a good meal. But lawyers had to stay in poor country inns. The food was bad, the rooms were cold, the beds were crawling with bugs. The lawyers had to share beds, except the judge. He had his own bed. Early in the morning, the courthouse bell would ring. Abe hurried to court. Pigs lived under one courthouse. Abe had to talk loudly over the grunts and squeals. People came from near and far to hear Abe. He made trials easy to understand. He told jokes and stories. People said he could make a cat laugh. Once, Abe whispered a joke to another lawyer. The lawyer laughed out loud. "Quiet!" the judge yelled. "You're fined $5. When the trial was over, the judge asked to hear the joke. He laughed as hard as the lawyer. "That was worth $5, he said. "Forget the fine." At another trial, two men argued over who owned a young horse. Each said he owned the mother of the colt. Abe led everyone outside. He put the two grown horses on one side of the lawn. He held the colt on the other side. Then he set the colt free. It headed straight for its real mother. One day, Abe got a letter. It was from Hannah Armstrong. Years before, Abe had lived with her family. Mrs. Armstrong cooked for Abe. She sewed up the holes in his pants. Now she begged Abe for help. Her son Duff was in jail for murder. Abe did not stick this letter in his hat. He wrote back right away, "Of course I will help you." Duff had been in a big fight. It was very dark, but a man said he saw Duff kill someone. Duff said he didn't do it. Abe believed Duff, but how could he prove the man was wrong or lying? "How could you see in the dark?" Abe asked the man. "The moon was full," the man said. "It was bright as day." "Are you sure the moon was full?" Abe asked again and again. "Yes," the man repeated. Then Abe held up a famous book of facts. It said there was no moon in the sky at the time of the fight. Now no one believed the man anymore. The judge set Duff free. Abe believed slavery was wrong. His state had laws against it, but the laws were not clear. Many blacks were treated like slaves. Nance was one of them. She worked for a storekeeper who sold her to another man. This man treated Nance badly, so she would not work for him. Abe argued for Nance in court. Illinois was a free state, he said. All its people are free, whatever their color. The judge decided Abe was right. From then on, no one could be bought or sold in Illinois. Abe had saved Nance, but half of the states in America still had slaves. In a few years, there would be new states out west. Abe did not want slavery to spread to these states. Abe tried to get elected to the U.S. Senate. If he won, he could make laws to stop slavery. He ran against Stephen Douglas. Douglas argued that each state should decide for itself if it wanted slaves. They gave speeches all over Illinois. Thousands of people heard them. Abe lost the election, but he became famous. In 1860, Abe ran for president. Stephen Douglas ran too. This time, Abe won. Abe grew a beard for his new job. He took his family to Washington. At every train station, crowds cheered their new president. Abe was ready to make his first speech as president. He carried a cane, a tall silk hat, and a speech. He looked for a place to put his hat. Stephen Douglas stepped up. "If I can't be president," he said, "at least I can hold his hat." Abe Lincoln was a great president. He freed slaves. He worked up for fair laws. He helped unite the nation after a long war. But he never changed his ways. He always kept important papers in his tall hat. All of the stories in this book are true. All of the people really lived. Here are some photos of some of them. When the photos were taken around 1860, the camera was a new invention. So here's Abraham Lincoln, and here's the judge that he made laugh, and the guy that he kept from going to jail, and then this is the man he ran against for president. So I hope you enjoyed those two stories. If you want to check them out for yourself, you can. They'll be in the library, and we are open. So if you guys have some special story times that you would like me to read, or some special stories, please let me know.